Thanks, Joe. And it is an honor to introduce our final speaker. Before I do that, I just want to welcome you all again and thank you for coming. I think this is going to be, the last session of the day is going to be a great session. So I do represent the Association of Fundraising Professionals. I hope that everyone in the room has heard of us. We're the Greater Detroit chapter. And we really serve as a resource for all fundraisers in southeastern Michigan. We provide monthly programs, and we have networking events. Also, we have special events like the National Philanthropy Day, mentoring program, and really it's about helping not just professional fundraisers, but also volunteer fundraisers in becoming the best fundraisers that they can be. So if you'd like to learn more about AFP, we have a table back there. And I encourage you to stop by and say hello. And now to introduce our speaker. So I'm going to read a little bit and then talk a little bit. Dr. Russell is a professor in the Department of Personal Financial Planning at Texas Tech University. He directs the on-campus and online graduate program in charitable financial planning. He graduated cum laude from the University of Missouri School of Law. He also holds a PhD in consumer economics from the University of Missouri, where his dissertation was on charitable giving. He has over 150 publications in academic journals, conference proceedings, and books. He has been quoted on charitable and financial issues in a variety of news sources, and his financial neuroimaging research was profiled in the Wall Street Journal's Smart Money magazine. So if any of you attended his earlier breakout session, you will know that he has a great sense of humor in addition to all of that, and is very passionate about charitable giving, which I think is really exciting. And I expect this presentation to be both educational and entertaining. So it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Russell James.
So I'm really excited to be able to share some of this. Is brand new stuff. This is where we're going to take a really deep dive. And whenever you do a really complex topic, really academic, you definitely should do it at about 2:45 in the afternoon. Because that's when people are just ready for complexity. The only thing that makes me think that this deep dive is going to work is that, fortunately, according to that clock, I've got 4 hours to get through this. So I didn't think I was going to be able to do it, but now I feel a lot better. So I want to share with you some results and also summarizing a recent academic article publication dealing with natural philanthropy. It's based on the idea that humans developed this capacity a long time ago, and that if we understand a little bit about some of the origins underneath why people make gifts, why they're philanthropic, it can actually guide us in some really practical suggestions. So what we're going to do this afternoon is three things. First, I'm going to spend just a little bit of time talking about theory and the natural philanthropy model. Then we're going to look at some experimental results and some of the natural origins under that model. And then we're going to get really practical. We're going to look at the 5 keys to building powerful donor relationships with this model. So that's a promise that says we are going to get to the specific do's and don'ts. But first, we got to start with theory. Why? Because I'm a professor, that's what I do. We talk about theory, so you got to put up with a little bit of theory for a while, and then we will get into what I think will be some practical implications that will help you in your communications and your fundraising. So to put it this way, we're definitely going to get to the very straightforward, do this, not that, but first we've got to look at a bit of the science of what underlies these things and what is some of the theory. Why do we start with theory other than the fact that it's one of the penalties you get from inviting a professor? The other is you have somebody who's used to speaking to people whose sole motivation is they're going to get an F if they don't listen to me, and so maybe somewhat less motivational than others. But the reason is that if you understand the why underlying some of these decisions, you have a much more flexible approach to what works and what doesn't work in different circumstances and conditions. If you just have a list of do's and don'ts, that may work in some cases, but then circumstances may change and it may not work anymore. So let's start with a model of charitable decisions, and let's start really super simple. This is in the afternoon, so let's keep it simple. How about this? So there's two options you have. You can choose to make the gift or refuse to make the gift. Well, that's simple. It's actually a bit too simple because there's a very, very important third option, which is you can avoid the giving decision. And this is one that people actually engage in quite a lot, both in experiments and in reality. Now, that choice of whether to say yes, to say no, or to avoid the giving decision is based upon impact. And we talk a lot about impact, but what we're talking about here is impact of each option on three things. Those three things are first, what we call altruism, which is simply the benefit to the recipient. Second, reciprocity, which is the potential benefit to the donor. And third, the impact on my possessions, that is the cost to the donor. So, seems pretty straightforward. We decide whether to give, not give, or avoid the giving decision based upon the effect on the recipient, the donor, and the cost to the donor. We just put that into a calculator and figure out which choice we're going to make, except we don't use a calculator. Instead, we use one of these things. And because we use one of these things, calculating the impact is not a simple mathematical process. And in fact, what we see is that whenever we present these opportunities, either for altruism or reciprocity, in a more naturalistic form, that is something that is concrete, visualizable, in particular presenting them in a story or narrative framework, that not only increases the emotion, but it increases helping and reciprocity responses in experiments. So with each of these three factors, and I expect none of them are a surprise to you, there's actually two different levels. With each factor, there is a surface version. That's important for small gifts, and we see a lot in small gift experimental research, but there's also in each category a deeper version. And that deeper version becomes more important when we're talking about major gifts, major investment gifts, or lifetime gifts from the individual. So let's look at each of these two levels. First, in direct altruism. In altruism, there's direct altruism, that's simply giving to support a beneficiary, but there's a different kind of altruism called code altruism, where we are giving to support a code of behavior or set of values. Now, in reciprocity, we're familiar with transactional reciprocity. That takes place all the time. I give you this, you give me that. This is a conditional transfer of resources, and I can get benefits from the recipient organization, from government through tax benefits, from other supporters, or I can create a shared good that I will also use, such as giving towards a new church building that I will use. But there's also a deeper level of reciprocity called friend or family reciprocity. And this is different because this is a mutual expectation of, to some degree, unconditional aid. It's not just a quid pro quo. We start using words like we heard this morning, all about relationship, and that comes about with recipients, with the organization, and can also come about with other supporters. And it turns out that these things are connected because acts of altruism can also signal to people that you're a very good partner for future reciprocity relationships. So there is finally two different types of possessions. There is gifts that come from disposable income, and typically that's where gifts come from. However, major gifts come from typically not disposable income. They come from wealth. So that is the basic model. I'll leave it here at the bottom as we go through, and I want to share with you a little bit of some experimental results that underlie this concept. We go clear back to 1964, and Hamilton actually proposed that it made sense from a genetic selection perspective to give money to other people. And it made sense when this little formula was true, where the cost to the donor is less than the benefit to the recipient, and then we multiply that by the genetic similarity. very straightforward model. This suggests that we like it when somebody's very much in need because that suggests that this is going to be a big benefit for them. And we actually see this in practice and experiments. If we can reduce the transaction costs or have gift matching funds where we increase the benefit, those things do increase giving. We also see in experiments that a variety of observable factors that correlate with genetic similarity, such as similarity in location, behavior, personality, and physical appearance, they also generate cooperation and altruistic sharing. So we do see this in experiments. A wide variety of research finds that among unrelated others, people are more willing to benefit those they perceive as being similar to them. So what does similar look like? Well, it can be really weird. People are actually more willing to comply with a request if the requester shares a birthday, a first name, or even fingerprint similarities in experiments. Not only that, but university alumni in one set of experiments were more likely to give to a student solicitor if the solicitor shared a similar first name or field of study. So we like to give to people who are asking us who are like that. An individual may also benefit others, not just by directly giving them money, but by supporting a code of behavior that improves the group outcomes. And we can see that support in a couple of different ways. You can get code support by costly rewarding of a person following the code or costly punishment of code violators. It's sort of a weird thing that in research, professors that research altruism also research costly punishment because it's considered to be the same kind of thing. And you can also personally internalize a code or cause others to internalize a code, which means you follow it even in the absence of punishment or reward. It turns out that reminders can increase attention to supporting a code. So, for example, if we, in experiments, are working with religious people and we prime them, that is, we mention religious words before an experimental game, it makes them more generous because we've reminded them of this code. Well, you don't actually have to be religious for this to work. A variety of experiments find that if people are simply reminded of the concept of love, by incidentally displaying the word, it actually increases charitable donations. This has been tested in donation boxes, in requests where a person was wearing a t-shirt. It's actually a female wearing a t-shirt, either said love or didn't say love, and it made a big difference. It's this idea that we're reminded of certain values, and those reminders then trigger behavior. There is, of course, transactional reciprocity. We know all about that. Quid pro quo exchange. I'm not going to talk about that because you already know what it is. What I'm going to talk about is something that you may be less familiar with, but gets really important, as we'll see in a moment, in giving, and that is this friend-family reciprocity. This is a mutual expectation of, to some degree, unconditional aid, not a conditional exchange. So let's go back to the natural context. In the natural context, this friendship insurance, it's the idea that you can rely on a friend to give you transactionally unjustified support in a crisis. It turns out this kind of friendship insurance is absolutely critical to survival in many natural contexts, much more so than simple exchange transactions. The survival impact from mutual friendship insurance, that is the willingness to give transactionally unjustified aid during a crisis or a social conflict. We actually see that exhibited in, for example, in other research in chimpanzees, in macaques, and even ravens. So this is a natural behavior. Now, going back to some of the behaviors in humans, one study looking at this said, for hunter-gatherers, illness, injury, bad luck in foraging, or the inability to resist an attack by social antagonists would all have been frequent reversals of fortune with a major selective impact. What does that mean? It means you can die in the natural environment with this. The ability to attract assistance during these threatening reversals in welfare, where the absence of help might be deadly, would have been critical to survival. So that's all to say friendship insurance is hardwired in because in a natural environment, you've got to be able to call on that when there's a need. Otherwise, you're done for. And although transactional reciprocity, that's all good and well, it turns out that that doesn't have as big of consequences because that's just promoting marginal increases during times when we're healthy, we're safe, we're well-fed, and we're just doing a little bit of transactional business. So friendship insurance is a big deal in a natural context. Here's the problem. Receiving mutual friendship insurance is absolutely critical, but providing it is really costly. So the trick is, how do we know who's going to be a good partner? If we're going to commit to really help them out beyond any sort of reasonable, transactionally appropriate help to that person, how do we know that if we get in trouble, they're going to have the ability and the willingness to help out in a crisis? And that's the real core trick to this friendship insurance concept. And that's what leads us into some actual practical consequences of some of these concepts. And so I want to look at the 5 keys to building powerful donor relationships with natural philanthropy. Number 1 key, advance the donor hero story. Let me jump back into a little bit of a theory to explain why this is so important, then I'll talk about how to do it. As I mentioned, in this concept of friendship family insurance, a core challenge is how do you, in advance, separate true friends who will actually deliver sufficient help in a crisis from, of course, the fair weather friends who appear helpful when things are fine, but they fail to deliver in a crisis. That's the real trick. Now, what does this have to do with philanthropy? Well, the problem is that in our safe, stable, modern environments, it's difficult to resolve this, to know this, because we're not encountering on a regular basis the kinds of crises that could resolve this, this sort of doubt of who's there for you and who's not beyond simple transactional relationships. Of course, if you have the opportunity to demonstrate self-sacrificial helping behavior, that is to demonstrate altruistic behavior in extreme or in crisis scenarios, that's a really important signal to let you know who's a person that you want to be spending time with, that you want to engage in this kind of friendship insurance with. Let's look at some experimental results that I find kind of interesting. One study found that although women generally prefer altruists for friendships and long-term relationships, they actually more strongly prefer those who exhibit heroic acts of altruism. There's another study that looked at the flip side of that. Another study found that reading a romantic scenario significantly increased men's subsequent willingness to engage in heroic altruism, but it didn't bump up their interest in engaging in sort of boring, mundane altruism. We actually see a lot of this in what to a purely rational economist would seem to be really weird behavior, where we've got charitable fundraising efforts that require extended fasting or plunging into cold water or walking on burning coals. What is going on with this crazy stuff? Well, it actually fits with this preference for heroic giving, showing that I will give under extreme circumstances. Again, from a purely rational economic model, one of the weirdest set of results is this. One study found that people were willing to donate more when they were informed that making the donation would require substantial pain or effort, such as running 5 miles or enduring a painful ice bucket task. It's called a cold presser task, where you stick your hand in a bucket of cold water and for as long as you can until the pain is so much that you pull it out, okay? Lots of fun in case you want to do that. As professors, we love doing that because there are very few ways that our IRB will allow us to torture people, but that's one of them, and so we do it all the time. So this weird circumstance where if you just ask for a donation, you get a little bit, but if you ask in a scenario of, well, this is going to require that you either suffer through this ice bucket challenge or maybe you run 5 miles, all of a sudden, yeah, I'll do that and I'll give a lot more. Weird sort of preferences unless we understand why this motivation that underlies things for heroic giving can be so powerful. So what is a hero? We actually do not need the extreme physical acts to show heroism, but a hero is any voluntary, sacrificial protector of group members or group ideals who merits lasting social approval. So, for example, if a person is protecting group members, that's an example of direct altruism. I'm helping out an individual. If a person is protecting group ideals, that's an example of code altruism. I'm supporting the values that we all agree on, or that my in-group agrees on. It is these social norms that then establish the social approval that says, yes, we all agree on these values. This is something that people like me agree on, and that makes the heroism an actual heroic story. Of course, it's not a heroic story if you're the only one that thinks you're the hero. You've got to have an audience that agrees with you. So when I mention advance the donor hero story, it's very important that we understand we're calculating this using these relatively old brains rather than brand new calculator technology. And our brains actually respond very strongly to story rather than to simple calculations. So we want to advance the donor hero story using what are called more tangible forms of framing. So what does this look like? Well, what it looks like is that people behave in ways that a rational economist would say makes no sense. Let me give you an example. From a rational accounting perspective, let's say you got a project. Maybe you want to build a well, and the total cost of that project is $10,000. You got to have $10,000 for the project. Now, from a rational economic perspective, it should make absolutely no difference which individual dollar bills are spent on which items. Got to have $10,000. Money is, to use a finance term, it's fungible, right? A dollar is a dollar is a dollar. That's rational. That's not human beings, though. From human beings, we know which makes the better donor hero story. Suppose we're building a well for a needy village. The cost is 50% for construction, 50% for overhead and administration. If I tell you your gift will be used for construction only, that gets the highest level of donations. If I say it's used for this project overall, that'll get a middle level of donations. And if I say it's going to be used for the overhead and administration portion of the project, I get the lowest level of donation. Now again, if you understand math, it costs $10,000, you got to raise $10,000. Is my dollar bill being, it makes no difference. But one is a great donor hero story. I built a well. And the other is, I paid for 3.5 hours of the utilities in the office where the administration of the international coordination for the thing that, and then some other, you see it, your story breaks down. So we have this difference between rational, logical, mathematical answer and the story. Here's another from an economic perspective. My PhD is in consumer economics. Really weird result. Experimentally, donors are more likely to give and give more if their particular gift is made at or near the fundraising goal completion. That's normal. Even when, in the absence of their gift, someone else would have made the goal completion gift. Now, from an economist's perspective, that's crazy talk. If somebody else is going to make the gift, I'm going to keep my money because it's going to happen anyway. But when they looked at behavior, both in experiments and in these online funding platforms, people will see, it's getting to the front. I want to be the last one. I was the one that helped cross the finish line, even though they knew that it was going to happen anyway. But it's much more heroic if we're the ones who help cross that finish line. That's a much more powerful story. Also, what's important about this is I'm talking about advancing the donor hero story, not creating the donor hero story. That means that the gift needs to fit within the donor's existing life story. We've got to see where are they at this point and then advance that story. So how do we do story? Well, back in the 1940s, Joseph Campbell spent a lot of time studying hero stories and myths all over the world. Looked at Eastern stories and Western stories and island cultures and indigenous stories and all of that, and he brought all that together, and he suggested, you know what? There's actually not a bunch of stories. There's actually just one story. There's actually just one hero story, what Joseph Campbell referred to as the monomyth. In other words, it didn't matter where he went, an indigenous island culture, some Eastern culture, some Western culture, the hero stories always fit the same pattern. And the pattern is this. The hero goes forth. The hero struggles with the gatekeeper, enters a horrible place, undergoes an ordeal, then gains a reward, and returns to his place of beginning with a gift to improve his world. Now, can you think about, within the context of charitable giving, how can we help advance a donor hero story? Think about a successful entrepreneur giving to her alma mater. She starts out as a teenager at this university. Then she goes forth into the world, struggles with the gatekeeper, enters a horrible place, undergoes an ordeal, builds her business, has lots of setbacks. All of these things come together, and then what happens at the end? She is successful. She gains a reward. She has a successful business. She has built wealth, and now has the opportunity, through a gift, to return to her place of beginning with a gift to improve her world. That is a powerful donor hero story. Or perhaps a cancer survivor giving to cancer research. Person is in their normal world, and then all of a sudden they go forth into a negative adventure, struggling, entering a horrible place, undergoing an ordeal after their diagnosis. And hopefully, as a result of that, they come out with a positive outcome. They gain the reward. They're successful in that battle, return to the place of beginning with a gift to help others who are going through that same process. That is a Joseph Campbell monomyth donor hero story. And I think we can begin to think through, how do we take our opportunities and present them in a way that completes this donor hero story for our individual donors that we're working with, understanding where they're starting from in their life. Now, I've got to tell you, I hope this isn't too much of a spoiler alert. I've just given you the plot and ending to every major epic movie ever, okay? They are quite familiar with Joseph Campbell, and they do this with essentially every epic movie. The hero, whether it's Star Wars or The Matrix or The Hobbit, the hero goes forth, struggles with a gatekeeper, enters a horrible place, undergoes an ordeal, then gains reward, returns to his place of beginning with a gift to improve his world. Now, why do these movie studios do this over and over and over again? Because it works. Okay? That's what I'm telling you. You want the story that works? This is the story that works. It works in indigenous cultures in the South Sea Islands. It works in major motion pictures. It works again and again. This is the hero story. And you may be thinking, well, you know, that's great for Star Wars and The Matrix and The Hobbit, but I've seen those movies, and I don't remember a fundraiser being in those movies. So what? There is. There's a fundraiser that's core to the story in all of these movies. Let me share with you the fundraisers in each of these movies. There is a character called the sage. The sage challenges the hero with a choice. Let me take a quote from the first Star Wars with young Luke Skywalker. Obi-Wan, who is the fundraiser in Star Wars, says, "You must learn the ways of the Force if you're to come with me to Alderaan." Luke says, "Alderaan? I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in for it as it is." Obi-Wan says, "I need your help, Luke. She needs your help." That's fundraising. That's taking a person in their normal life and saying, I'm going to challenge you with a choice. She needs your help. I need your help. Hey, by the way, for any Star Wars fans, what happened? Luke said no. It happens in fundraising. Look, if it happened to Obi-Wan, it's going to happen to you too, okay? Part of the deal. Now think about this. Whether you're offering somebody the opportunity to leave the Shire, take the red pill or the blue pill, or go to Alderaan, let me ask you this. Are you giving someone the opportunity to be part of something bigger than themselves? Okay? If you understand that in this donor hero story, you have an important role to play, the role of forcing the choice. That's what the sage does in the monomyth. There always has to be this character. It's in every story, and that character is us. To force that choice, yeah, you can keep doing what you're doing. You can stay in the Shire. You don't have to go out on this epic sort of adventure, this epic gift that I'm talking about. But I want to challenge you to be part of an opportunity that's bigger than yourself. And you got to make a choice. You got to thumbs up or thumbs down. And if you're like Obi-Wan, you'll get the thumbs down, but you keep coming back, and eventually circumstances change, stormtroopers come by, whatever happens in their life, and things get turned around. Now, if you understand your role in the hero story, how does that role affect how you feel about asking and how you feel about asking big? I mean, you know, look, you're Morpheus. You're Gandalf the Grey, right? You're not going to come in and say, oh, well, you know, I was thinking maybe you could leave the Shire for like an hour or two, but if you're not comfortable with that, you know, we can come back and just kind of see how it goes. No! You want to present an opportunity to be part of something bigger than themselves, something that completes the donor hero story, that allows the person to return to their place of origin with a gift that changes their world. Well, I've been talking about giving in general. It turns out many of these characteristics are particularly important whenever we deal in the topic area of gifts, where there are gifts in wills or planned gifts where people are contemplating their death. In a recent set of experiments, one publication found that death reminders actually increase our attraction to personal heroism. It's sort of this idea that when people are reminded of their own mortality, there's two reactions that consistently come. One is avoidance. I'm going to deal with that later. I'm going to avoid all of this. The other is what's been called pursuit of symbolic immortality, the idea that something reflecting my life story, my community, and my values will live beyond me. If I can't avoid the fact that I'm going to disappear, I'm not going to be here forever, then I can start focusing on, well, wait, but my story, my values, what's important to me can continue on beyond me, and so I can gain comfort in that. And one of the things that continues on is the hero story. I mean, are there very many things that have endured for 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years more than our donor hero stories? More than our hero stories, excuse me. We're working with donors. Hero stories are enduring, and they are support of one's surviving in-group. So some of the different experimental results. Death reminders increase people's self-reported similarity with the hero. Oh yeah, I'm like that heroic person. I'm identifying with that. It turns out that describing your own hero after you're reminded of death actually reduces death anxiety and death-related thoughts. Now, it doesn't work if it's somebody else's hero. It's got to be part of you. It's got to reflect your values, and something you care about will continue. So it's this idea of it's not the hero story that's attractive, it's my identification with the hero story. And in a particularly weird result, one other experiment found that reading of the heroic act reduced the death-related thoughts, but only if the hero shared a characteristic. And what they tested in this case was if the hero was reported to share the participant's birthday. Now all of a sudden, oh yeah, that's a little bit like my hero story. So in this context, when people are thinking about death-related topics, these hero stories, the idea that something that reflects my community and values will live on, becomes particularly attractive. So donor hero stories become, if anything, much more important when we're talking about the area of planned giving. We actually see this in neuroimaging results when people are making charitable bequest decisions. Research that was conducted at the Texas Tech Neuroimaging Institute and has since been published in experimental in neuroimaging experiments. When people are thinking about who they want to leave as a charitable gift in their will, they engage in visualized autobiography. It's the same activations we get when people are replaying their life story or thinking about significant moments in their life. It's almost like you ask people, do you want to leave a gift in your will to this organization? It's like they're writing the final chapter of their autobiography, so they've got to review that autobiography to see, how does this cause fit into my life story? You don't actually need to use a neuroimaging machine to find that. Dr. Routley in the UK in qualitative interviews found exactly the same thing. When she asked people, why did you pick the charities that you picked to be in your will? It was about their life story. Does the cause fit in with the life story? So it's all about advancing the donor hero story, the donor hero life story. Now there's a challenge with this, because sometimes there's an issue of who is the hero. Is it the case that the donors are really just an ATM for the heroic administrators, right? Here's the heroic administrators, and we're doing all of this, and you guys need to go out and find some donors to fund this amazing stuff I'm doing. You know, if you want, I can talk about the amazing stuff I'm doing, and then because they need to give the money so that I can be the hero, right? Now, tell you the truth, that'll get you $20. It'll get you $50. Like, oh yeah, that's a hero over there doing his hero stuff. So yeah, hero. But that's not going to get you the major investment. It's the donor hero story where I know something about your life and your values and what matters to you, and I provide an opportunity. I tell you, red pill or blue pill, here you go, you got to make a choice, right? I provide the opportunity to advance that donor hero story. That's what gets the major investments. Now, I'll be honest with you, some administrators may not like that. I mean, that's a view that says, actually, you administrators, you're just minions running around executing the donor's heroic plans, right? That's your role in the process, okay? Now, here's a challenge with this. The challenge is the donor hero story works, but the administrators are the ones that approve our copy, right? And administrators love administrator hero stories. They will approve that all day long. Yeah, tell them how awesome we are and that they need to be our ATM to sponsor our awesomeness. Like, again, if you want $20, $50 gifts, that works great. But those aren't the major lifetime investment gifts. Second suggestion, make the charity like family. So as I mentioned, some of my research that I do is neuroimaging. We actually learned a lot about charitable giving from the very first neuroimaging study. It was published back in 2006. We learned a couple of interesting things. We learned that charitable giving is rewarding. Much like receiving money, it activates reward centers of the brain. People enjoy, they experience pleasure from charitable giving. But charitable giving was different. It was different in this way. Charitable giving uniquely involved oxytocin-rich social attachment brain regions in that decision and enjoyment process. Now, oxytocin is kind of a big deal because it's used in both maternal and romantic love in humans, other mammals as well. So there was a later study that found if you squirted oxytocin up somebody's nose before you asked them to make a gift, it increased their charitable giving. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's not how you use this science. This is scientifically important because it shows us with a direct causal relationship that the family bonding hormone leads to charitable giving. It is not, how do I surreptitiously squirt something up the donor's nose before I make the big ask, right? Okay, so I've actually got some good news for you. You don't actually have to squirt something up somebody's nose to increase their oxytocin levels. A later study found that human touch, when followed by a small gift, both elevated oxytocin levels and subsequent charitable giving. Now, if I were to come to you this afternoon and say, hey, you know what? In fundraising, it's a good idea to shake a person's hand, put an arm around the shoulder, share a donor premium gift. That probably wouldn't surprise you. But what's interesting is to see that the mechanisms through which these very old tried and true tactics may be working is through this family bonding hormone of oxytocin. So think about what I've just said. What I am telling you is at the fundamental, chemical, neurological, hormonal level, fundraising, charitable giving, is not selling cars, okay? It's not transactional. We are talking about building family social relationships, not building market contract relationships. Market contract relationships are fine, but that's not what we're doing, because the decision to share is a decision that relates to family social relationships. How do we do this? You already know how to do this. I mean, what extended family members are you closer to? Are you closer to those who call, who write, who visit? Of course you are. So things that are appropriate and things that are inappropriate become more immediately obvious if we understand that we're trying to make the charity like family. We're trying to build family social relationships. And all of a sudden it makes clear where, oh, wait a second, I wouldn't go to a Thanksgiving dinner and say, thanks, Grandma, here's a 20 for your troubles. That's weird. That makes no sense, right? So if we understand the context, then we'll know this is fine, that this is appropriate, but these other things aren't appropriate. What we want to do is to emphasize unconditional social support. That's the difference with these friend-family relationships, is they're not purely conditional. So we want to emphasize an unconditional, to some degree unconditional relationship. How do you do that? Obviously, I've already mentioned providing a small gift, especially a gift that reflects a deep understanding of the donor and the donor's preferences. Very powerful to show we are in this relationship of unconditional social support. Demonstrating empathy during a crisis. Once had a fundraiser that shared. He was a fundraiser for a law school. He said he had one of their alums was in the hospital, so he stopped by just to say, hi, hope things are going well, and just wanted to see how things are going for you. And he said, you would not believe how that changed the relationship. I mean, oh my goodness, that one visit, and from then on, I mean, before it was hard to, but now we were just super connected. And, here I'm thinking, actually, that's exactly what friendship insurance says. You have demonstrated you're there in a time of crisis. That's nothing stronger than doing that if we're talking about friendship insurance or building these friend-family relationships. Certainly expressing gratitude for the relationship shows that this is the kind of connection we have. But you can blow it up. This is actually a real study. In case you didn't know this would happen, I'm going to surprise you all. If a university violates friendship expectations by refusing to admit the donor's child, they quit giving to the university. It doesn't matter how much you tell them it doesn't give you preference. If you do this, it violates friendship rules and you're done. If you start emphasizing a purely transactional relationship, that contradicts the friend-family reciprocity. As I mentioned, we don't, if you're invited to somebody's house for dinner, you show up with a bottle of wine, you don't show up with a check. Hey, here's for some of your troubles, right? We don't do that. We also find, and it's a whole nother presentation I have, but this test comes back again and again and again, every time we describe planned giving vehicles, when we initially describe them, using formal technical contract words that you would never have used in a normal conversation with your grandmother, people don't want to do them. They're not interested. I don't know what that is, but I don't want it. Because what we're doing is we're shifting their frame of mind from a social, family sharing frame of mind to a market contract transaction frame of mind. And that frame of mind does not encourage sharing. If we're focusing only on the donor's money, and it's obvious that if this is all about the money, then we're emphasizing a purely transactional relationship, and we're blowing up any opportunity to try to build this unconditional friend-family reciprocity. We also see this in gifts and wills in the power of family tribute bequests. One of the ways in which the charity can become like family, we did a number of experiments where we found that if we asked somebody, hey, what's the likelihood that you might leave a gift to, and we tested 40 large national organizations, but let's say, for example, what's the likelihood you might leave a gift to Ducks Unlimited? And they go, no, I don't. Ducks Unlimited, not really. Then we asked them, do you have a family member who would have appreciated your support of this cause? If so, tell us about it. Tell us about their connection with the cause. If we could remind them of a family member, in particular an ascendant, like a grandmother, grandfather, aunt, uncle, who had a connection with the cause, and then we asked them that bequest question again, except in this case, we asked them about honoring a family member by making a tribute gift to charity in my will. All of a sudden, their interest in leaving a bequest gift to that organization, way up. Much higher than their interest initially in doing anything for the organization. Why? Because now I'm making a gift to the organization, but it's actually a gift for a family member. This works really well in an estate giving context. Now, word of warning, this doesn't work for current gifts. People don't typically, it may work for very major gifts, but people don't normally make small current gifts in honor of somebody unless it's right around the funeral time. But it always works with gifts and wills because that's a much more appropriate time. So of course, since we found an intervention that worked, I did the normal thing, which is, all right, let's stick people in a brain scanner and see what's happening. What's going on with this? Here's what we found. When we first asked them that bequest question, so you want to leave any money in your will to Ducks Unlimited? We didn't get any activation of memory or emotion, nothing. It was just dry, right? Now, if we asked them about leaving to a family member or a friend, all sorts of memory and emotion activation, but charity, nah. But once we took them through that tribute process, reminding them of a family member connection to the cause, having them think about that family member's connection to the cause, and asking them this question about a tribute gift in a will, now what happened is not only, as you already know, did their interests go way up, but now it's a completely different decision. Now that charitable decision is all about memory and emotion that is taking place in the brain as they're making that choice. We can build friendship family relationships, making the charity like family, actually in a variety of different ways. We can encourage interaction and support among donors to build a community that is a little bit like an extended family. So one of the values that we can have here is we can build these relationships, these opportunities for relationships where donors can become a little bit like family members to each other. Because it starts out, hey, here's somebody who really cares about the same things I care about, has the resources to be able to support these kinds of things. It's an excellent place to build these kind of friendship family opportunities. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about providing benefits, publicity and benefits. And the trick is here, you've got to do it in the right way. And let me explain what that means in a moment. Now, we do have reciprocity. It doesn't have to come from the charity. It can come from, if the gifts are publicized, it can come from other observers, come from other people in the donor group. It can come from the government with tax advantages. It can come from other people saying, hey, that's a person that I want to be in business with. That's a person I want to hang out with. We share values. As a result, lots of experimental results show that if you increase the public visibility of a gift, it increases giving behavior, unless you do it wrong, which we'll talk about in a minute. Again, back to neuroimaging. in a neuroimaging experiment where people were making charitable decisions. In some cases, they could see they were being observed. In other cases, they couldn't see that they were being observed. There was actually greater reward activation in the brain if they made that gift and they could see that people were watching them. Some weird results. Donations will increase even if you just increase the feeling of being observed. These 3 dots on a response card increased the charitable giving on a mailing. In the research, it was called eye spots because it kind of makes you feel like you're being watched. Here was another study. In this study, there were 2 different groups with 2 computer backgrounds for this experiment. Each person received a payment and was asked, do you want to share any of it with another anonymous participant? Only difference is whether they had this background or that background on the computer. Did it make any difference what the background of the screen looked like? Yes, it did. Normal screen, 55% said, sure, I'll give them some. This weird screen with eyes on it, 88%. Oh yeah, I'm sharing. So just reminding people of being watched can bump things up. Of course, we see this in other contexts. Donors in experiments, and you all know this from practice, give more when you place them in a leadership position of publicly giving prior to rather than after other donors' decisions. That now I'm being watched, I'm going to influence others' behavior, I will give more, which is why in a campaign it's easier to raise money at the beginning, and then of course everybody wants to help complete the goal at the end. Those are the 2 easier times. So publicity is actually necessary in this context to display to others that you're a good person to hang out with, you're a good person to connect with. We actually see that in a variety of experiments. In experimental experiments where participants got to choose their partner for a joint profit-making game, they almost always chose the person who had been most generous in a charitable giving process earlier. People want to do business with others that reflect those values. So let's go from money to love, including small hints of philanthropic tendencies and descriptions of potential dates actually increase women's ratings of the described men's desirability for friendship or long-term relationships. And oh, by the way, the flip side of that, another experiment found men contributed more to charity when they were being watched by a woman rather than by a man. We also see that this altruism reciprocity actually only works if other people agree with the idea. So social norms are really powerful. This was kind of a fun study. This was conducted in Sweden, where students walking across campus were asked for a gift to a Swedish charity of 20 crowns. It was randomly assigned to be asked for the gift one of 3 ways. Either it was just a straight up ask, you can support the organization with the gift of 20 Swedish crowns. This shows you the bar of what percentage of the students said, yep, here you go. The other was to create a social norm. You can support the organization by donating 20 Swedish crowns. 73% of college students in the country who were asked did so. That worked better, but it worked even better if they said 73% of college students at this university who were asked did so. The question is this, with the social norm, do people like me do things like this? The more the example is like me, the more powerful that example is. And of course, we see this in the estate giving context, that if we ask the charitable estate question by leading with, many of our customers like to leave money to charity in their will, we now triple the participation rate in actual charitable components included in will documents. However, you can do it wrong. If donor benefits or publicity reduce the social approval, they will backfire. So you need to present them in the right way. I'll give you an example. Mathematically, it is completely identical to have a subsidy that is framed as a rebate rather than framed as a matching gift. Okay, so let me run through the math real quick. I make a $50 gift and you say, okay, we're going to do a $50 match. That means I made a $50 gift and the recipient's got $100. Okay, or I make a $100 gift. You give me a $50 rebate. The $100 goes to the recipient. Same result. My net cost is $50. The recipient gets $100. But if we frame it as a rebate, It does not encourage giving as much as if we frame it as a matching gift. Because one of those things focuses on, hey, here's what you get, and the other focuses on, hey, here's the benefit that you're doing for the donor. Things that work well. Anything that is a sunk cost for the charity is a compatible benefit. In other words, if you're already having the event, you've already got the football games going on, it's already taking place, I don't feel like there's extra cost for you just saying, hey, you can come along too if you want. In one experiment, charity raffle sales, if you want your charity raffle sales to fall, they fell dramatically if people were told that the cash prize was funded with half of their ticket sales. Why? Because if it was something that had already been donated or given, 100% of my dollar goes to the charitable cause, but now you're telling me, oh no, you're taking part of my gift and you're using it to give me this benefit. That didn't work. Unconditional gifts work great because they aren't related to I'm giving and you're giving me this back, we're in a transaction, and that becomes an incompatible benefit. Benefit from other donors are compatible. Building donor communities, boards, advisory groups, social events, where important future transactional relationships are likely to emerge, that can be a very powerful benefit. And it is one that is compatible because it doesn't reduce the effect of my gift on the beneficiary. Shared benefits are compatible, improving a shared environment or a shared good. I mentioned the example of giving to a church building that we're all going to use. That works well also. Compatible publicity. Now, we've got to be careful here because requesting or even desiring publicity appears to be sort of self-interested and anti-heroic. So we've got to reframe that publicity. This is something you don't want, but it's a way to influence other people. It's a second sacrificial gift by allowing the publicity you don't want because we know that will spur additional gifts, which is true. It does spur additional gifts. So we want to provide this, but in the right way. Okay, so I want to share with you some brand new results. In fact, these were so new, I wasn't able to submit it as an opportunity to present at this conference, but I'll give you the bottom line, and that relates to this last piece, minimizing perceived loss. Framing and context changes perception of the cost of the gift. Let me share with you some experimental results that indicate this. Asking for the same gift from assets, where it constitutes a very small share, rather than disposable income, where it constitutes a very big share, can reduce the cost, the perceived cost, the emotional cost of a gift. One experiment was kind of fun. Asset gifts are actually really good because they remind us of our wealth. People behave differently when you remind them of their wealth. In this experiment, people coming into a grocery store, they were randomly asked one of two sets of questions, either what's in your wallet or your purse, do you have cash, do you have credit cards, or do you own stocks, do you own bonds, certificates of deposit. People that were asked about if they own stocks or bonds, they spent 36% more on the subsequent shopping trip. Okay? Why? Because when we feel wealthy, we act wealthy. In particular, when we feel wealthy, we act charitably. It is the case in one really interesting study that the strongest predictor of donations was not actually wealth, it was the subjective feelings about one's wealth. If I feel wealthy, then I'm going to act charitable. And if I don't feel wealthy, then not so much. We can manipulate this by referencing people's wealth, having them think about it. This is one really cool manipulation of college students, which I enjoy doing all the time, manipulating college students, where their charitable giving was increased if they were first asked to report their savings and they had a checkbox with a scale, and the scale ranged from $0 to $500. That was the top, okay? They gave much more after that than if they were asked to report their savings where the scale went from $0 to $50,000, right? Because if I report on a scale from $0 to $500, I'm like, whoa, I'm over the top. I mean, talk about wealthy. They don't even have a category for me, right? Oh, a gift, yeah, I'm all about a gift, right? When people feel wealthy, they act charitably. Now, I'm summarizing a bunch of different academic literature here when I put all this together because I think you'll see how it all connects. People are much more willing to give if it is an exceptional gift, such as from irregular earnings. So if you frame a gift as an exceptional event, it removes it from comparison with other regular day-to-day budget items. Oh, this is a one-time deal. So irregular earnings, rather than regular earnings, people are much more willing to give from. People are actually much more willing in experiments to give from unearned gains. If you make them work and then you give them money, say you want to share some, nope. But if you say, if you give them a show-up amount, say, oh, you got to work some here. After they're done with their work, they say, oh, by the way, we're just going to, you're a nice person, so here's some extra money, a bonus. Do you want to share any of it? Oh, yeah, I'll definitely share that. Unearned gains, unearned money, people want to share. And finally, people are much more willing to share in a gain than to take a loss. Now, those are just framing context. Does it feel like, oh, I've got a gain, I'm going to share with it, share some with you? Fine. But if it's, oh, I got to take a loss to give you money, that's much more painful. Now, you put all that together. Seriously, I'm summarizing like 30 different academic papers here. Irregular, unearned gains, what are those? Those animals are called appreciated investments, okay? So it's a big deal to be able to understand how to ask for appreciated investments. So I want to share with you something new that kind of blew me away, not by the direction, but by the magnitude. In recent months, the IRS released for the first time all of the electronically filed Form 990s in a searchable format that we can do data analysis on from the year 2010 forward. We've got 2010 through most of 2016 now. That means we can actually now do an analysis for that 7-year period on every nonprofit organization's fundraising that electronically filed to see who went up, who went down, who stayed the same. So what I'm showing you here is just an excerpt from this new study. Here what we're looking at is we're looking at only organizations that are raising at least $1 million a year, okay? And we're looking at those, and we want to see what their growth rate was, comparing what were they raising in 2010 and what were they raising in 2015, all right? If the organization received only gifts from cash, that is, they're not getting any gifts from securities or real estate or any other non-cash gifts, if they only receive gifts from cash, which you have to report on the 990, the average growth rate for those organizations total for 5 years was 11%. That means 5 years later, they're raising 11% more money on average. Now, those are not inflation-adjusted dollars. Inflation was 8.5% over that period of time, okay? What that means is organizations raising over $1 million a year in the United States, 5-year growth rate is kind of treading water, right? You grow a total of 11% in an 8.5% inflation environment, you're treading water. Now take a look at the opposite side. These are organizations that received, in particular, securities gifts. That is, organizations that not just receiving cash, they're receiving gifts from securities in 2010 and 2015. The average fundraising growth for those organizations receiving gifts of securities, 66%, okay? And then if we have the larger group, which is organizations that receive any kinds of non-cash gifts put together, whether it was securities or not, that was about a 50% growth rate. Let me dive into this a little bit more, because the magnitude of this difference is really surprising. You might think, oh, well, that's just because those are bigger organizations. No, it's not. Actually, we can do the same comparison among every single segment size of organization. We can even look at small organizations that are raising over $100,000, between $100,000 and $500,000. Divide them into those only cash in the top, those getting gifts from securities in the bottom. What was their 5-year growth rate? You want to look at $500,000 to $1 million, $1 million to $2 million, $2 to $3 million, $5 to $10 million, $10 million and above. It's always the same result. Now, since I can't do the full presentation, I'll let you know that this comes up every single way we cut it. You want to look at 10 million plus, you want to look at 25 million plus, you want to look at 50 million plus, you want to look at 500 million plus, it is always the same answer. It doesn't matter the size of the organization. It also doesn't matter the sector. We were able to cut this and say, hey, let's just look at, for example, environmental organizations. Let's just look at arts organizations. Let's just look at education organizations. It didn't matter. Every single segment had the same basic concept. Organizations that are raising gifts, including gifts of assets, not just pocket change, right? Those organizations grow their fundraising dramatically faster than organizations who only know how to ask for cash. That was the 5-year growth rate. We can even look at what happens in the same year when gifts shift from cash to assets. So on average, and here we're looking at over 750,000 IRS Form 990s, over 200,000 organizations, and these are not private foundations. These are actually public charities. Whenever their ratio of cash to their total contributions, whenever it shifts to more cash, their total fundraising goes down. Whenever it shifts to more securities or more real estate, their total fundraising goes up. So what's happening here? I just want to talk a little bit about some of the psychology of this. When you ask for a gift from assets, my natural inclination is to compare that to my wealth. When you ask for a gift of cash, I don't hold my wealth in cash. Nobody holds their wealth in cash. You ask for cash, you're making me compare it to the other things that I take money out of my pocket and spend money at Starbucks and other things like that. The same gift, if I ask for it from cash, is massive if I'm comparing it to my other disposable income. But if I can ask for it from assets, it makes me think about my assets. Oh, it's a big gift. Well, as a share of my assets, okay, maybe not that big of a gift. It changes the donor mindset. And so it is actually not just tax advantageous to the donor, it's advantageous to the charity if you can shift the donors from giving out of disposable income to giving out of wealth. It makes a big deal. And the charities that don't do it, they're just treading water. They're just treading water. And the charities that are doing it, they're growing, growing, growing. It changes the donor mindset when you start asking for gifts from wealth. There are other examples of ways that you can change the framing of a gift to reduce the perception of loss. The final section I want to talk a little bit about is managing decision avoidance. As I mentioned, we've got 3 options. We've got the yes, we've got the no, but we've also got the avoid. I don't want to think about that. I don't want to engage with that. In experiments, we do see increasing the number of requests to give results in more gifts. We actually also see that in field experiments. We find that people who are asked more give more. In one kind of cool experiment, they found that at this large state university, alumni were called by the student fundraisers alphabetically. So that led to this weird experiment where actually we knew the frequency with which you'd been asked for a gift based upon your last name, because they don't always get all the way through the alphabet, right? And so turns out that, surprise, surprise, people that were randomly assigned, as it turned out to be called with more asks, gave more money. We've also seen this in other experiments where we increase the amount of mailings. It will increase giving as well. Then it's just a point of when do you have the cost-benefit trade-off. However, we've got a flip side to that we see in a variety of different experiments. When given the opportunity, a substantial share of people who would have given if they were asked, they took efforts, or in some experiments even incurred a financial penalty to avoid being asked. So this idea of avoiding being asked is a really attractive concept. So we have to understand that avoidance of the donation decision can also serve as a barrier to beginning any interactions with the charity. So managing decision avoidance doesn't mean ask all the time, right? That's not managing the decision avoidance, because then we can't build the connections, learn the story, have that relationship. It may be that relieving the prospect's concern about being asked for money might allow for the development of the relationship with the organization or affinity for the cause that ultimately can increase interest in making that gift. So, how do you mess up managing avoidance? You can do it one of two ways. One, you can be all listen and no ask. If you're just out there friend raising, but you don't make the ask, you're not managing avoidance because you got to make the ask. Or you're just transactional. People that lead with the generic ask before they know the life story or understand the relationship. If you're all ask and no listen, you're not managing decision avoidance. So this is essentially just, hey, this is kind of a cool thing because we're here at the end of the day. So I'm telling you the exact same thing you heard at the beginning of the day. Which of the four quadrants are you in, right? Are you just building friendships and not asking? Or are you just asking without the friendships? We don't want to be in either one of those quadrants. We also see experimentally that when you ask, you need to ask simple. As you increase the number of options, this will tend to increase inaction even if all of the options are desirable. As the number of available volunteering options considered increased, so did the tendency to postpone committing to any volunteering action. So it's fine if you've got dramatically different outcomes that, okay, this is a completely different thing, but at a certain point, you can just have too many decisions, too many options. Preliminary questions may soften the avoidance response. One of the things we found in the most recent experiment currently under review is that if you ask people about the importance of a cause or the importance of a series of projects related to the charity before you ask them about their interest in making a gift or a gift in a will, that it bumps up their interest in making the gift. If you start with the gift, that's not really a flexible decision. But if you start with, what do you think? How important is this? What's the importance of this other project? That's very flexible, and I can start thinking about how important is that to me, and what do I feel about that? And if we go through that process first, it actually formulates what their opinion is on the subsequent gift. Or we can also do this by asking soft questions. If you happen to sign a will in the next 6 months, what's the likelihood you might include a gift to the charity? This is a more preliminary question, but it doesn't get that hard avoidance response. Or, of course, the favorite of, would you consider joining these others with a gift of $10,000 to help fund this project? Considering it, that's a little bit softer language, and we're joining others, so we're very happy to join those others. Well, my goodness, you have survived 2 Fast Talking Texans in one conference. Congratulations. That's a little bit about some of the deep theory deep into the afternoon. I hope some of it's been of interest. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you.
Dr. James, thank you so much for that. I've never enjoyed theory so much as I did this afternoon. That was incredible. Just a few things before we wrap up today. Certainly want to thank AFP Detroit chapter for sponsoring this presentation and our conference as well. And as we close, again, don't forget the evaluations before you leave. Certainly want to thank all of our presenters today, both local and from far reaches of the country, for being here and really enriching us and the organizations that we represent to really move causes forward. Our sponsors, certainly, especially Northern Trust, for being our lead sponsor again this year. I want to thank our co-chairs for today's event as well. Particularly thank Lori Angel for all her work to make this event run so smoothly every year, Lori. And in typical Lori fashion, she's never in the room when we thank her. Somehow she manages to sneak out. Most of all, thank you to each of you for being here and investing the time. As I said, it's so important for personal growth, but to really move your causes forward to really enrich our communities. So thanks for the work that you do, and thanks for being here. Now, I don't know about you, but whenever I leave one of these conferences, you go back with all these ideas, you're all energized, and then maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, it's like, God, all that stuff that I learned, I'm not able to do it. So I look at it as kind of like the 5-hour energy model. If you want to get re-energized maybe every month, consider joining the Plan Giving Roundtable, and we'll keep re-energizing you every month so you can continue, right, to benefit from all these educational opportunities. So give that some thought. Save the date next year, June 12th. We'll be right back here for the conference again. And unless there's any final questions, thank you again for being here. Drive safely, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.